screen. To share. All right. How's everybody doing? Sorry about the delay. Um, I'm gonna I'm gonna lose this because you can see my face. Oh my gosh. um, my voice is already going. I thought a week off would be helpful, but 3 week or straight through summer teaching January till now with no more than a week off of talking, it's taken its toll. So hopefully this doesn't get too much worse over the course of the semester. But we'll see. Whatever happens, happens. All right. Everyone's good. Everyone made it through the storms. No, no major issues. I hope. If you or if for whatever reason um, you do need any extra time or support, if you were affected by the storms by Laura in any way, please do reach out to me. I know I'm accommodating as much as I can. I know the university is as well. So if you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. Schedule wise, I made a couple of updates on Moodle. I had a training that was supposed to be last week that was pushed back to the end of September, which is actually going to work out really well in terms of our midterm. So we'll do our midterm during, it's a Tuesday to Thursday training now, all day long. So both classes would have been canceled for that week anyway. So I'll have, we'll probably do an online proctoring of the first half of the midterm, which is the in-class part. And then we want to have class on the Thursday. So it's a week later than it would have been. It'll work out really well in terms of content. I feel very confident about that. So as of right now, the midterm date is set for September 29th, I believe it is. And everything will be due on October 1st. So I'll wait a couple more weeks before I kind of give you the specific logistics for that. But we can plan on not being in class either the 29th or the 1st. The 29th at this time, we will be in class, taking the in-class portion of the midterm. So do be prepared for that. That is going to be at a specific time, day and time. The second part is the take-home part anyway, so that you'll have to turn in by October 1st. That's kind of how I'm looking at that. All right. So again, I'll go over specifically how we're going to administer that that midterm in a couple of weeks, but you guys will have you'll be in good shape for the midterm. Okay. All the other assignments so far have been excellent. I've really appreciated the thought that you guys have put in, especially on the Willowbrook activity. I'll talk a little bit, or we'll spend a little bit of time kind of debriefing from that today, and then jumping into the continuum of services. All right. Are there any questions from either the live audience or online about anything that we've gone over so far? Yeah. Yeah, the court case is on, I think it's this Sunday. The 6th is the due date for that. Are there any questions about that? Does y'all get in touch with each other? Has that started in any way? No, you guys haven't reached out to. Okay, so I don't know. It's challenging facilitating this online. So after class today, I will go and send small group emails to each of you within those groups. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and get started. I'm sorry, I thought that I forgot that I had asked you guys if you have access to each other's emails. You said you didn't. I forgot that. So I'll extend that by a couple of days. So you have, you'll probably have until next Tuesday to do it, to the 8th. will be the due date for that. Okay. And like I said, I'll send those emails out right after class today. Okay. I mean, I read all read through all your Willowbrook assignments, but any thoughts, anything that you guys would like to share online or in person, anything that really jumped out at you, other than, horrificness aside, what spoke to you about the evolution of where we were to where we are now? Any thoughts? Anybody online?
And I can definitely say, like, obviously it was awful then. Excuse me, my cat's gonna interrupt occasionally. But yeah, obviously it was way worse then. And even now, like, I've personally seen how um, special education slash accommodations are still not always being met, and there's always, like, there's still kind of an ongoing struggle, but you can definitely see a significant difference as to then and now. I think it's an ongoing process, just like anything in life. Nothing is always perfect, but it's getting better as the years go on.
I think that's the big takeaway for me, is that, when you juxtapose that concept with what we see in schools now, it's really easy to kind of stop and say, "Oh, thank God we're not there. We're not where we were." But I think it's just as important, Taylor. You hit the nail on the head, in my opinion, um, in that we're still not done though. There are still a lot of issues. We we have we're fortunate here in that, I know most of the SPED directors in the southern southeastern Louisiana region, and most of them are, while I may not agree with everything that they do, they're all in it for the right reasons, and they're all doing everything they can in the best way that they believe to help their difficult populations, right? I've been in places where that's not necessarily the case, where yes, you have these children getting public educations, which is great, but the public education it's a modern version of an institution where you don't have 50 or 75 children to one adult for feeding and changing and for basic life needs, but you might have a caseworker who has 50 or 75 IEPs under them. And in terms of education and providing an education, facilitating an education, that's just as challenging, right? It's not possible to provide a quality education for that many students in a case, as one case. So I think that the like I said, the immediate reaction of, "Oh, we're so much better than we were." Yes, that's true, but we can't stop and say the work is done. We still have a long way to go. Good, Taylor. Anybody else? Any other thoughts? Anyone else online? I think the other thing that stood out to me has to do with knowledge and acceptance. Obviously, there are, as time passes, our knowledge of disabilities, both educational and medical, advances annually, right? We have such a much better understanding of what it means to have autism now than we did 10 years ago or 20 years ago. In the movie, there was the adult who previously a child who had MS, I believe it was, right? And was physically had a physical disability, but not a mental disability, had no educational disability. So here's a person who is fully cognizant of everything that is going on, but does not have the physical ability to stop it. I mean, I mean, I can't even put myself in that situation. I can't even find the words to summarize it. It's beyond heartbreaking. Um, and I fear that we're doing that now with something else that we don't know. Like someday we are going to have a drug or a therapy or an understanding that allows children who currently do not have a voice or do not have a physical or cognitive ability to do something that they are going to be able to do in the future. And we're going to look back at our current setup and say, how could they do this, right? We, in 50 years and 100 years, what we're doing now will be the Stone Ages. And that's a really challenging idea for me to hold on to. But I think it also helps drive progress. It helps drive our ambition to be better, to understand more, to be better teachers. And honestly, this doesn't simply apply to special education. This applies to all education. This applies to everything that we do. But the cost of progress is everyone that didn't get to experience that progress. And that's kind of the silver lining to Willowbrook, right? Or to the institution of institutions, is that they were not started as a mass, punitive measure for people with disabilities. They were started to help. They were put in place to help individuals and to help families. And society as a whole, not the individuals, society as a whole, let that go by the wayside. We can't let that happen again. We have to learn from those types of mistakes. All right, very good. So now that we've kind of spent a couple of weeks looking backwards, we looked at the laws that got us to where we were, or where we are, the court cases, this birth out of the civil rights movement. We're going to move to where we are now and looking at what all of this has meant in terms of an actual process and procedure that is in place in schools today, for special education. As I said multiple times, the law that we have in place, let me get this all prepped. All right. The law that we have in place provides the groundwork for what can and should happen for special education, but it does not specify any specific aspect of an individual's education. I'll keep saying it because I think it is this important, this powerful. We have one of the most unique laws that we have is in place for children with special needs, because no two truly are the same, right? Every child, regardless, learns in his or her own way, but the ways that our children with special needs learn and don't learn are so specific. Has anyone worked with children with Down syndrome? Have you worked with multiple children with Down syndrome? Do they learn the same way? No. They know totally different things. They learn in completely different ways. Anyone learn with children with autism? Good. Do they learn the same things in the same ways? No. If you have a child with autism and a child with Down syndrome, are they going to learn in the same ways? Absolutely not. Now that's very, very different than a classroom full of neurotypical children who, yes, this child learns a little bit better this way, and this child learns a little bit better this way, but they can learn from the same material. They can learn from me talking at you and you following directions and me giving you activities and you doing those activities, right? Some might learn a little bit better from drawing, and some from reading, and some from coloring, and some from physical objects, but there's not nearly the degree of limitation. So when we have this law that says you must find the way that works for this child, that is so unbelievably powerful, all right? So what we have in place, or what's developed, and this is not spelled out in IDEA, but this is the procedure that has developed out of what the law does require and does specify. We end up with this idea called the continuum of services. Too far. You can all see general education classroom at the top. I don't have to scroll up for that. Okay, good. The continuum of services is loosely a diagram that shows the level of support that we can provide for any individual who's getting IDEA funds or who has an IEP diagnosed with a disability, all right? Just as the law does not specify where, when, who, neither so does the continuum of services other than the where, all right? So within the continuum of services, there's still a lot of not ambiguity, but flexibility in terms of who is going to provide services, for how long, and in what ways. What the continuum of services starts to do is looks at levels of support. When you read these words up here, the first thing that should come to mind is the idea of least restrictive environment. What we have here is at the top, the least restrictive places that a child, physical places that a child can be receiving their education, down towards the bottom with the most restrictive. What this does not talk about is that appropriate of free and appropriate, right? So we still need to balance that, but this kind of gives us a starting point. This gives us the starting point options of what is my physically least restrictive environment down to my physically most restrictive environment and everything in between. We can have restrictions that are not physical. We can have restrictions based on ability to learn with others, to work with others. We can have restrictions based on curriculum and environment. So this gives us the framework to answer the rest of the questions by starting with a physical location, all right? So level 1, general education classroom. I'm going to go into all of these in detail. Level 2, general education classroom with consultation. Level 3, support within the classroom. Level 4 is resource room support. Level 5 is a special ed classroom. Level 6, specialized schools. And level 7, specialized facilities. All right. There we go. Level 1 and level 2. General education classroom or general education classroom with some level of consultation. At level 1 and level 2, you have children who are, for all intents and purposes, completely included in the general education classrooms. The difference between level 1 and level 2 is that at a level 2, the classroom teacher, not the student, but the classroom teacher is receiving supports from a special education teacher in the school about some tactics or some interventions or some ideas that could be put in place to better support the student. The student themselves is getting all of their instruction, all of their intervention, all of their day from the general education teacher. So at level 1, I am a classroom teacher. I have my 20 kids, 25 kids. 3 of them have disabilities. I'm working with them just like I'm working with this child over here. And I'm not getting any outside help from anybody else. There is a SPED teacher of record for the student. Maybe I am a duly certified teacher, and I am that SPED teacher as well. But for the most part, I am just a general education teacher working with my class. My class happens to have some students with disabilities, but I'm not modifying the curriculum, maybe a little bit here and there, but I'm not doing any new or different curriculum. I'm not doing super intensive supports beyond anything that my other students might also get as well. I, as the gen ed teacher, am just teaching the child. All right, that's level one. Level two, maybe my child can access all of the curriculum, conduct appropriately with himself or herself with his or her peers, but every now and then just gets a little bit too frustrated when the work is challenging. Maybe when the child was in a special education classroom, the special ed teacher had a particular strategy that they would use to support the child in those types of situations. Child's really good at using them, but needs that structure in place. So I, as the teacher, reach out to the SPED teacher and say, hey, are there any resources that you have that I can use, or do you have any materials that I can use to put in place so that I can support this child in those situations? SPED teacher says, yeah, here's all the stuff that I use, here's how I implemented it, here's how I expected the child to respond, and move from there. So in level two, the teacher has some level of support by the special ed teacher in order to help service the child, the children. But the teacher themselves is still the one providing that service. All right. These are far and away the least restrictive means for educating a child, right? When you can have a child in a general education class 100% of the day with their peers, accessing the general ed curriculum, and maybe receiving some level of behavior support, maybe a little bit of academic support, but nothing out of the ordinary, that's a really good place to be. Level one and level two, those are our goals. Those are our full inclusion opportunities. All right. Level three is one of the more common forms of inclusion that we end up seeing. The co-teach model. How many of you have seen a co-teach model before? Anyone seen a co-teach model before? Nope. Anyone online? Okay. All of you have your videos off today. The co-teach model is when I have a classroom teacher who is the primary teacher, and then I have some other adult in the room. I would think so, right? That adult can be a paraprofessional. That adult can be a child-specific aide. That adult can be another general education teacher. That adult can be another or a special education teacher. There are lots of different ways that we can have co-teach models. But anytime there is another adult in the room specifically for some kind of support for the child or children with disabilities, that's what we're talking about with level three. All right. Level three can be an extremely powerful way of working with students in an inclusion classroom. When I was in graduate school, I was a second grade teacher, inclusion teacher. I was very fortunate to be in a co-teach model where I had 2 to 3 paraprofessionals, depending on how many students with disabilities I had in my class. Using those adults, I was able to, for basically any subject, divide my class into 3 different groups. We grouped based on level. We were able to really move at the pace that group needed. The value of that should be readily apparent beyond special education. I think we've all seen children who do not have disabilities that need significant support in classrooms. And when you can go from 24 kids to 5 to 8 kids in a group, that's extremely helpful. Every child should be so lucky, right? We also have children with disabilities who don't necessarily need one-on-one support in those gen ed classrooms. We have children who maybe need a little bit of reminder, a little bit of support, or maybe that small group setting, but can otherwise function appropriately in that gen ed classroom. So depending on the setup that's actually used, the co-teach model is a slightly more restrictive setup than level 1 and level 2, just because we have smaller student to teacher ratios, but it can actually provide a huge benefit, not just to the students with disabilities, but also to the gen ed kids, all right? I love this model. If you ever have the opportunity, whether it's with another certified teacher, whether it's with a special education teacher, or whether it's with paraprofessionals, there's so much good that can come from level 3, that can come from this co-teach model. The challenge is that now you're sharing your classroom. Now you have to coordinate with another adult. You have to work through any differences in opinions with another adult. You have to work with this adult on a daily basis. Teachers are very protective of their domains, very protective of their classrooms. Having another adult in the room constantly can be a major support, but it can also be a burden. You guys are going to, whether it's in the spring or next year, you guys are going to be taking EDUC 396, which is a class totally focused on collaboration. When you are working in this type of environment, when you're working in the co-teach environment, your ability to collaborate will define your success. If you're working with that paraprofessional, the teacher's aide, or another teacher, you do not have that good relationship, you have no chance of being successful, right? If you've ever worked in a group, if you've ever worked with another adult in any way, shape, or form, you know that those that you get along well with, you're successful with. Those that you don't, it can be a struggle. It's the exact same thing in a classroom. It's magnified that much more when that other person is there specifically for a child or 2 or 3 with a disability, all right? When it comes to paraprofessionals who are assigned to children with disabilities, you can do it in one of 2 ways. You can either be a child, what we call a child-specific paraprofessional, where your job is to support that one child, or you can be a shared aide. You can be a shared paraprofessional, where you are there, a third of you is there for one child, a third of you is there for another, a third of you is there for another. So you can have 3 or 4 children with disabilities in your classroom and maybe just one support. But that's going to say something about the level or the levels of ability of the children in your class, right? You're not going to have 4 children who need child-specific paraprofessionals, but only 1 aide to go around. If it says that they get a full child-specific paraprofessional, then that person is there for them, all right? Moving right along. All right, level 4 is a resource room type setting. How many of you have observed or seen resource room settings before? A little bit? Okay. So with resource rooms, you're talking about what's called a pull-out model of special education. So this is where the child still, level 1, 2, and 3, all the way to 4, the child is still housed in the general education classroom. They're still getting almost all, if not all, of their instruction in the gen ed classroom. In the resource room or pull-out model, the child may leave the classroom for some portion of the day, an hour, hour and a half, depending on the child, depending on what they need, but for extra support, intensive support in a specific area or two. We want to make sure not to go overboard with our children who are receiving resource services, because if they're out too much, then there's no benefit to them being housed in that inclusion classroom, right? We want to make sure that they are accessing the gen ed curriculum, that they are working with their peers, that they are getting instruction from the gen ed teacher. So if we have the resource room situation, it's usually for maybe additional support for reading or language or speech or social services. I've seen that one a lot, where they may go to a school counselor once or twice a week, all right? One, maybe two subjects across the week. That's what you're looking at when you're looking at resource room support for special education, all right? Contrast that with level 5. There we go. Level 5 is what we typically think of. I'm not going to say it's the most common, but it's what we typically think of when we think of special education classrooms. Level 5 is a self-contained classroom where all of the students in the class are students with disabilities. We have limited class sizes depending on the severity of the disabilities that we have in there. It can be as low, well, technically it can be as low as 1 student. That's rare, right? And I would be hesitant to call that a self-contained class. Usually 6 to 10 students, all right? Usually 6 to 10 students. Within that range, maybe up to 12. Within that range, though, we can have a lot of different formats. I can have 8 children and 1 teacher, and that's my self-contained classroom. I can have 6 children and 4 teachers, and that's my self-contained classroom. I can have 12, 1, and 3. 12 students, 1 teacher, 3 paraprofessionals. That's usually how we talk about those ratios. Student, teacher, teaching aid, or paraprofessional. So 12, 1, 3, 6, 1, 2, 8, 1, 2. Those are the types of formats that we talk about. The lower the ratio, the more typically, the more severe the disabilities in the classroom. The lowest ratio that I've been in is a 6, 1, 4. 6 students, 1 teacher, 4 paraprofessionals. So that really means 6 students, 5 adults, all right? When we talked about level 3, you talk about the collaboration that's necessary there. Think about the level of collaboration that's, how amplified that collaboration comes when you're in a self-contained classroom with a significant number of adults, all right? In those situations, you're effectively working one-on-one with students. You have one dyad kind of floating around, all right? That's one form of the self-contained classroom. And like I said, that can go all the way up to 12 students and 1 teacher. Usually we see 8 to 10 students. Usually we see 2 to 3 paraprofessionals. I'm going to give you that as like your prototypical self-contained classroom. 8, 9, 1, 2. 8, 1, 3, something like that. You might have a student who is pretty good most of the time, but when they're not good, they're really not good, right? They're, Monday they're fine, Tuesday they're fine, Wednesday they're fine, Thursday something ticked them off, something got under their skin, and now the classroom gets blown up, right? In those situations, you have all those teachers for a reason. Maybe you need to remove all the other students from the classroom. Maybe you need to have 2 adults to work through the tantrum, through the behavioral episode with that one child. So you have those aids in there, those child-specific aids in there for those reasons, so that when, if and when something does occur, you have that level of support. I, the paraprofessional, take the other 7 students out. I, the teacher, and the other paraprofessional stay in the classroom to make sure that the child is safe, that property is safe, and that myself and the other adult are safe. All right, that's another form. All right, maybe we have an 812 for another reason, where half the children are getting pushed in to general education classrooms. So level 4 was pull out, right? We had the child leaving the general education classroom for the resource room. We can also have push in services, where a child is receiving services in a self-contained, or services, getting their education in a self-contained classroom all day, but maybe math, they're really strong, or reading, they're really strong. So a paraprofessional goes with the child into a general education classroom for the math period. All right, that is a really beneficial way of transitioning from self-contained into inclusion. Right? We never want to say that our child, this is where they are, so this is where they're going to be. As the child's needs change, as the child's abilities change, as the child's skill level changes, we want, through this continuum of services, to be able to move with them. All right? So just because I am in a self-contained classroom, I still have all this flexibility of what my education is going to look like. It could be more restrictive within that classroom. It could be less restrictive within that classroom. The flexibility of that room is the power of that room. When you have schools that say our self-contained classrooms are for our most restricted students, you're disservicing the power of this format, of this classroom. And we see that, we do see that, where all the students in our self-contained classrooms are wheelchair bound, or have intellectual disabilities, or have severe autism, all right? The child who has a more moderate form of autism, a child who has a learning disability, can greatly benefit from self-contained classroom, maybe for a year or two. Maybe they don't need such heavy support, but if from kindergarten on, they're in a general education classroom, they're going to get lost. So we take them, move them into a self-contained classroom for a year or 2 or 3. During that time, we make sure that not only are they learning the academic skills to succeed, but they're learning how to learn. They're learning how to learn at a rate commensurate with their peers. If I have children, a child who starts off who can only learn if they're taught right in front of them by one teacher, I don't want them to learn that way forever and ever. I want their environment to expand. I want them to be able to look around and see what their peers are doing and see what the teacher's doing at the front of the room and be able to learn from that. So I can do that, I can work with that in the smaller environment. If I have 6 or 7 or 8 children in my classroom, I can give the child the attention he needs in that setting in order to learn how to learn in a group. Once he learns how to learn in a group, now we bring him into the general education classroom. Maybe when he goes into the general education classroom, first a paraprofessional comes with him. Now I've moved from level 5 to level 3. Maybe we moved into the general education classroom, but we're going to still step out for our science subject because we really struggle with that one. So I've moved from level 5 to level 4. But we're moving closer and closer and closer. Okay? Who's been in self-contained classrooms before? Anyone online? Any self-contained classrooms online? What did that look like in that you've seen?
So there was the main teacher and then the parents with them, and each child had a station that they basically worked from, and they were helped by.
Good. How many paraprofessionals were in there? Do you remember?
It was either 4 or 5.
Okay.
I used to work at a local middle school,
Okay.
and I actually went observed in the self-contained and the mild to moderate classroom.
Excellent. All right. Good. So that my guess would be when you're talking about four or five paraprofessionals in a room, I'm already thinking that's a lot of support. That's a lot of
Yeah.
people. So
There was only about 6 or 7 students.
exactly.
But they had a runner. They had one that was in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
Had a lot of severe
High needs, right? Yeah. So it's a little bit counterintuitive, where the more adults you see in the room, chances are the smaller the class size is going to be. It's not the other way around, because you have to think about that restriction, right? The less restricted the child is, the more independent they are, the more independent they are able to be. Okay? The most important thing here is not thinking as self-contained as just that, right? That is an option for self-contained. And it's a very common option, but I think it's an overused option. And I think that transition option from self-contained into inclusion is really an underutilized option that I'd love to see schools use a lot more.
Now, we did have a student who he had high functioning autism.
Mhm.
So he was in self-contained, but he would push in
Good.
for band. He was amazing
Yep.
in band.
Yep.
And so he would push into band during the day to get that breakup.
Awesome.
But
That's
he was smart enough to know what he was doing. He could read his stuff. And he knew what he was doing on the computer and stuff too.
Yeah, and what I love about the push-in model from the self-contained class is that these children often need schedules, they need practice for the routines, for how to interact with people. You can use so much of that small environment, that self-contained environment, to practice the specific skills the child's going to need for a specific class, right? There's so much option there when you are pushing it. I like that model a ton. All right, level 6 and level 7 are a little bit different. I alluded to these a couple weeks ago when we started talking about some of the goals and principles and least restrictive environment in particular. Level 6 and level 7, so levels 1 through 5, all take place at school, at a public school. Level 6 and level 7 are held for the children whose needs cannot be met in levels 1 through 5 at the school. If you have a child whose needs can't be met in a mild to moderate to severe self-contained classroom, you're talking about some pretty significant needs. Yes, it's possible that the needs are not so significant, but the school or school district or the teachers don't have the resources or knowledge or know-how to address your specific needs. It could be that most of the time you're fine, but when you're not fine, as whether it's a runner, a stripper, someone who is highly aggressive, you can be in these situations that when it's really not good, it's really not good. And it's not safe for the child to be at school. And in those situations, there are alternate schools and potentially alternate facilities that can be still educational to work with these children. All right. I've worked at an alternate school. It was a great experience. I've not worked at an alternate facility. I know of a couple that work primarily with school-age children. I can give you the most extreme example. I won't get there quite yet. But there are facilities for younger children who have significant disabilities. When we're talking about alternate facilities, usually what we are talking about are children who are in imminent danger to either themselves or others. If you have a child who is completely wheelchair bound, right? That is a significant, it could be physical disability, it could be educational disability, it could be medical disability, whatever it is, it's significant, right? That education can still happen in potentially a public school, definitely in an alternative school. The facilities, the residential type facilities, are saved for those even more severe cases where they are a danger to themselves and others. All right. Alternative schools, on the other hand, are schools that are typically reserved for children specifically with special needs. Oftentimes, there is some sort of funding mechanism that is a balance between public and private. Any public school has to provide an education to a child, to every child, right? Disability or otherwise. If your self-contained class is not an appropriate setting for your child, they need something more restricted, you as the school are legally required to work with the parent to pay for either one of two things: the development of a program that is appropriate for that child, or maybe tuition, maybe busing, something so that that child can get the school that they need. So I'll give you a few different examples of that. The school district that I worked at when I was a second grade teacher. So I was a second grade inclusion teacher. It was a K-2 school. There was a K-2 self-contained class that was highly specific in behavior analysis, right? We had a child who came from, or multiple children that came from neighboring school districts. Those districts did not have those types of self-contained classrooms, right? They had self-contained classrooms, but they were not appropriate to the needs of the children. We, as the school district that had the program, were paid significant sums of money by the home school district to send their child to us. Those monies funded those classrooms. In one case, so this has been going on for 2 decades now, that this district has had this type of program. In one case, a child came to us for multiple years. He'd worked his way through the self-contained class into the inclusion classroom. I was not ready to release him. He was in my classes last year in our district. I was not ready to release him back to the district. He still had some significant deficits. He was doing really well, but he was not all the way there. In the intervening years, the school district had developed their own classroom. It was a self-contained classroom. This child was in an inclusion classroom. They had made a self-contained classroom, which they had not had before, that they were saying met the needs of that particular student. They were no longer going to pay, I want to say the amount was something like $100,000 a year for this one student to go to a different district. They weren't going to pay that anymore because they had developed this program. They'd already had the space. They now have a teacher, take your teacher's salary, and they could teach, they could educate 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 different students. So there's obviously a cost benefit to developing that program on their own. I, as the teacher, was in a position where I could say that classroom and the classroom that child is currently in are not apples to apples. You're talking about moving a child from an inclusion classroom to a self-contained classroom. I, as the teacher, don't have anything to stand on other than my words. You remember from the principles of IDEA, due process and parent participation. We're in the IEP meeting, the parent's in the room, parent doesn't really want to pull the child out, but the school district's saying, no, we're not paying anymore, all right? What can the parent do? That's where due process comes in. This particular parent did not have it in her to fight the fight, but many parents do. That parent has the ability to sue the school district and say, this placement is not appropriate for my child. And then a court will go through and rule and decide where the child's going to go. That's not what happened in this case. The child went back. When I moved here in 2014, in late 2015, I got a call we got an email from Orleans Parish School Board. They had a child that was being educated in the public school setting, New Orleans public schools, right? Charter, whichever charter it was. Still working within the New Orleans public schools. The parent was saying that the setting that the child was in did not meet the child's needs. The child was in a room by themselves with a teacher, getting services all day, getting an education all day. He was on what's called a functional IEP, where he's working on daily living skills, taking community trips, those kinds of things. Child was absolutely a potential threat to himself and others. There's the potential for to run. There's potential for harm, for property destruction. The parish was still doing what they needed or what they felt they needed to do to provide the education for this child. Mom was adamantly against having the child sent to another facility, and there are no alternative schools in the area that were right for this child. So what does the parent do? Parent sues. Parent says the district is not providing a free and appropriate education in the least restrictive environment for my child. They are by themselves, one teacher, getting a highly specialized curriculum all day. Parent wins. Parent won that. All right. Orleans Parish School Board spent the next year developing an off-site classroom. And while they were developing that classroom, they were taking a whole other part of the school and making, how big is this room? 1,000 square feet ish? A room probably twice this size that was going to be a classroom, an apartment, not to live in, but to practice daily living skills, apartment and community setting for this child. The parent, that's what the parent wanted. That's what the parent got. The school board had to fund all of it. Parents have a lot of power if they want to go that route. It's messy, it's challenging, it is their right. You can go the other way too. If the parent's demanding something, the school can sue the parent. Right? Say, no, this is not, or if the parent keeps the child out, I should say. The school can sue the parent, say, get them back in, we have the setting available. It's contentious, but it's in their right, and it needs to be dealt with. It says it all throughout the law, all right? Those schools, those facilities, they're there, they serve a purpose, they can be very, very productive. The last one, this is probably the last thing for today. I worked at a publicly funded private preschool for children with disabilities. Publicly funded, but private school. So what happened there, and it was a preschool. So we had from early intervention all the way to 5 years old. That was our age range. School districts would identify children prior to coming into the school system that they knew were going to need educational support. You have an early diagnosis of autism. The parent comes to the school board and say, what can I do? You have a diagnosis of Down syndrome. You have other physical disabilities that are going to have an educational impact, right? The school systems in the surrounding area don't have the Head Start programs or the early steps programs to support these children. So they pay to send these younger children to us so that hopefully by the time they are school aged, they have the skills so that they can be educated in the classrooms that the school does have. In that situation, the sum was a lot less. It was like $20,000 to $30,000, maybe $50,000 a kid. Still a lot, but not the $100,000 from before, and not the whatever Orleans Parish spent. But they spend that money for a year or two, and hopefully by the time the child is ready for kindergarten, the child doesn't need self-contained or need that level of support or need to be sent somewhere else. So that's an early investment. So the school's saying, look, our options are spend $100,000 over 2 years, and hopefully this school that's set up to work with young children with disabilities can get them where they need to be so that we don't have to spend that much to keep sending them out somewhere else. All right? So that's a really healthy partnership between the public school and this private school. All right? There's lots of different options. That's obviously the underlying theme here. There's lots of different options when it comes to how and where. The continuum of services is a very fluid, very flexible means for providing all of those different types of services. All right? Any questions? Cool. When we come back on Thursday, or when you guys online come back, you guys are online, we're going to take a little bit deeper look at the RTI process and the IEP process. Those are the processes of how we actually move through special education. All right? Cool. See you on Thursday.